is, so up to this point, just kind of rehash what we did. I cut a paper, contact paper shape out of like shelf paper. We stuck it onto the blank screen, kind of in the center. Then we carded screen filler over, so that's blocking out all the background areas. And then when we peel the contact paper off, we have this open shape in the middle. So on the first day, we printed that shape onto our paper, and we had our registration system set up using tape tabs here so that we have the corners of the paper always aligned in the same place underneath the screen. After that was printed on all the sheets that we wanted in our edition, if you go over it with one pass, you might get kind of a sheer color that's a light tone. And then without changing the ink, you can just squeegee over it multiple times and it layers 2 or 3 layers of that transparent color. So you can make the color more intense without having to add a lot more ink to it. So that's one technique that you might decide to do. It also means that if you are inconsistent when you're printing your edition, and on some prints you only go over it 1 time and other prints you go over it 3 times, you may have too much of a difference in your prints when you're done. So try to squeegee the same number if you can on each print. Sometimes it's not possible if you run into a little problem where screen prints unevenly. You might have to go over it an extra time, but do your best to try to be consistent when you're squeegeeing so that the intensity of the color is consistent in the edition. Then I came back in and I drew some textures with washable crayon, so Crayola crayon. I want to make sure it's the washable kind. And we also used some liquid drawing material. So I was using the gum arabic. Some of you may be using the blue drawing fluid. So they work the same way, the liquid ones. When you apply the liquid ones, remember you need to have your screen out of the hinges and propped up on wood so that it doesn't soak through onto your sketch or onto your backing board. So it's important to it's more convenient if you can do the liquid part after you do the crayon layer so that you are saving some time and not having to wait for that to dry before you do the crayon layer. And so now we're ready to coat the open areas of the screen with the screen filler. Then we're going to need to let that dry for another 10 minutes or so before we can wash out the blue crayon and the gum arabic. Okay. So I'm going to prop up the screen again with some wood blocks. And make sure the screen filler is shaken really well each time you use it. I've got a piece of mat board that's got a nice straight cut edge that's about as wide as the image. You always want it a little wider than the image. It doesn't need to be as large as the whole opening. So lay down a couple of lines of screen filler and then kind of press with a nice even touch. And then we're going to mop up the extra. And then if there's any drips, we can just sort of spread them out toward the border a little bit more. So that's about all we can do right now. So we're going to set it in front of the fan, let the second coat of screen filler dry, and then we'll just use cold water to wash out the crayon and the drawing fluid. The crayon usually takes a little bit more work to get out of the screen because it doesn't completely fill the mesh. It's sort of it's more of a rough mark, so I'm going to work at that a little bit more. We've got some green, like Scotch-Brite pads, those scrubby pads, and we can kind of loosen it up a little bit on both sides and then continue to rinse it out. So once that's open up, then we'll have all the line work ready to print. So I'm going to go ahead and set this over there to dry, and then we'll come around and grade your homework. Okay. Don't use any soap, and if you need to switch to warmer water, that's okay, but the warm water might also eventually take out the screen filler. So I don't want to do excessive scrubbing if I don't have to. If you end up only doing a drawing with the drawing fluid, usually you don't have to scrub it at all. It just wants to lift right out. But the crayon takes a little bit more work. So I'm going to be kind of gentle. And the screens, when you are cleaning the screens out, you can be pretty, let's say, when we get to the point where we're trying to remove everything, you can scrub pretty vigorously, but you need to make sure you're always pressing sort of evenly on both sides of the screen. If you just press really hard from the front, I've seen students like just rip a huge hole in the screen. So you can be kind of aggressive, but you have to kind of maintain pressure on both sides of the screen if you're going to scrub too hard. So just cold water for now. With the ink mixing, if you're not, finding a color that you like there, you can start with one of our basic primary colors and then modify it so that it's more intense. So I intentionally mix these first few colors transparently so that they work well for our first colors, but we need a darker color for the second color, or you need a contrasting color. So if you put your first shade in yellow, pretty much any other color will cover that very easily. But my color is blue, so I need to make sure that I've got a color that's darker than this. So I think what I'll do is I'll start with that original blue color, and then I'll add a little bit more black, and I think I'm going to shift it slightly greenish too, just for a little bit of variety. So these are universal tints, which is the same kind of colors that they use at the hardware store when you're mixing paints. So the amazing thing about this is you can add it to almost any sort of medium to make different types of materials. So if you add it to gum arabic, you can create like watercolors, because gum arabic is the binder for watercolors. If you add it to epoxy, you can make like clear resins and things with this colorant in it. You can add it to concrete. You can add it to, in this case we're adding it to an acrylic base, so we're making an acrylic ink, but it doesn't dry out, but it's super, super concentrated and it's quite expensive. So you want to use just a little tiny bit of this. Some of these bottles, this one was $34, but some of the more expensive colors can be like $60 for a little tiny bottle like this. So we're going to start with the transparent medium, and we're just going to add a drop or two at a time and kind of test your color out on a scrap of paper to see how it will lay on top of other colors. So I'm going to pull a little bit of this out rather than changing the whole color of our original block of anchor. So I'm not going to use it a whole lot. I'm guessing maybe that's 4 ounces, And then I'm going to add a little bit of black. This black's pretty transparent, so I think I'll add the original mix all these here. So just a couple drops, a little bit darker. green just to shift it away from the blue family a little bit. And then I want to stir it really well so that it's not streaky. Scrape down the edges. So it looks almost flat in there, but I'm going to spread it out on a little bit of paper here and kind of spread it. I've got some prints on newsprint, so I can use that to kind of practice what color I want to mix here. So it should be a pretty deep forest green on there. So it'll appear maybe almost black, but it's got a little bit more character than a flat poster black would have. So I think that looks pretty good. And then just to kind of make it easy to find the inks later, I usually put a little dab of artist tape on there and just put a tiny bit of the color on the white tab so you don't have to open every lid to figure out what's in the containers here. So the screen should be about dry now, so I'm going to bring it over and we're going to mask out the background on the back side to keep ink from going to those outer areas, and then we'll go ahead and print the ones that we started yesterday. Okay, so you can kind of see when you hold it up to the light, all the areas that are open. It looks like there's a little bit of, I didn't do a super heavy layer of screen filler, so we might get a little bit of that pinholing where a little bit of ink comes through, but I'm just gonna go with it for the demo here. So, one thing to think about when you're doing that coating of the screen filler, you don't want to use a brush. If you're trying to apply it with a brush, it's going to start dissolving away the drawing fluid right away, and it's going to either not block out the screen there, or it's going to distort the lines, and kind of mess them up. So you want to try to get the screen filler on as quickly and evenly as you can. If you notice that it's a thinner layer than you want, what I would do is stop and let it dry without washing it out, and then do a second coating of screen filler. But don't keep going over it, or you'll see the drawing fluid start to melt away and it'll mess up your screen. So you could let it dry and then just try a second coating before scrubbing out the drawing fluid. Patch out the background again. Make sure I'm not covering up any part of the design. Smooth out any wrinkles. on the practice paper, the newsprint, just to make sure the color is what I expected before I go to print on the better prints. So I'm using the same registration marks that we used for the first color. You want to make sure you never change those until you're ready to do a new image on your paper. And sometimes you can kind of see through the edge of your shape. So some of these screens, because the pins are a little bit smaller than the hole in the hinge, there's a little bit of give. So if you're not careful, you could be off by a little bit. So as you lower the screen down, if you can kind of shim it up so that it's as close in alignment as possible. Sometimes you'll see you're a little bit off and you can reach under and move the paper too to get it in alignment. And then go ahead and put ink out there at the top. So you'll find that you don't use quite as much ink on the second color because so much of the screen has been filled in. You're just really doing some line work now instead of a large flat area. And then give it a pressure. If it's not as thin as I'd like here, so I'm going to put one more time, a little bit more attention to that left side. It's a little bit, it feels like it's not as crisp as it should be, so it might be because I flood coated. I think I'm going to try the next one just going straight across. I'm hoping to get a little bit more of the light blue showing up in some of these marks. It just looks like the ink sort of oozed underneath the stencil there, so we'll. So what I'll look for when I'm kind of evaluating your prints is I want the second color to meet up perfectly, if possible, along the edge where your first color was. So if the dark blue hangs off by 1/8 of an inch, and then we've got a gap of lighter blue there, that's going to be kind of off register. So your goal is to try to get that second color to fit exactly inside that first shape that you print, and we want nice even coverage if we can get it. So then to dry this, we're going to just start on the very bottom rack of that drying rack and try to fill up the whole layer. We want to be careful when you go to retrieve your prints later not to lift up all the prints that are above yours or you'll damage them. So you've got to kind of reach in carefully, or if all the prints that are above yours have dried, you can carefully stack them, one stack per student, and that can save some more space because we'll fill this up pretty quickly. But if we always start at the bottom, then we'll get the most use out of that rack. All right, so now at this point, after you printed all of your prints, let's say you've got all 4 on the good paper, then you're going to just clean the screen out. So it's very easy to remove the screen filler. You need to use Poulin though, so we've got to make sure we've got the right kind of cleanser. So this stuff works great. So first step is to just get all the extra ink off with a piece of mat board, and then rinse the extra residue of the ink off with just cold water. And then while the screen is wet, you'll just sprinkle some of the Bon Ami on the front and the back and just spread it around. Sometimes if you've just recently put the screen filler on, you can wash it out just almost immediately. If the screen filler's been on for a few days, then you might have to let it sit for 5 minutes or so and then come back and spray it. But you'll use hot water and a pretty firm spray and it should knock it right out. So your homework for tomorrow, just make sure and get our days right. Okay, so as you come in, you should have your 2-color print done. You're going to turn in your best one. So it gives you 3 or 4 shots of getting one that's nicely registered. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. And your screen should be clean because we'll be going right on into paper stencil. So try to have it washed out with the Bon Ami and have your print ready to turn in. You'll put your name on the print, and we talk a little bit about signing prints. You always sign in pencil, you never sign in pen. Pencil is more archival, it's less likely to bleed or fade than ink would. And then if for some reason the print ever gets wet, pencil can survive being wet, whereas ink usually will run. So what you want to do is, even though these are irregularly shaped, you want to kind of imagine if you decide to mat this someday, you're going to have probably a rectangular mat. And so you want to sign straight across the base of the image. You make a title for the piece if you want to. It's really helpful to have titles, because if someone sees your piece and they want to ask you about it, they can say, oh, I saw that piece named Fish or whatever. But if everything's untitled, then you might have 100 pieces that are all called untitled, and it's really hard for you to catalog and things like that. So it's nice to have a title. And then with prints, what you do is you create an edition typically. That's one of the benefits of being a printmaker, is that you can get like 10 or 12 that all look identical, or some people will print hundreds that are all identical. And they're all considered original artwork. So it's not a reproduction in the way that a poster would be a reproduction of some other type of artwork. This is the artwork. So what you do is, after you've printed all of the prints you ever plan to print of that image, you count them up, and the bottom number is, you're going to put a fraction in there, the bottom number is the total number of prints that look just like this one. So if I have 3 that look just like this, I would number 1 over 3. The second one would be 2 over 3, and the third one is 3 over 3. Now let's say I've tried something where the first color, let's say I tried it in yellow first, and I didn't really like it in yellow, and then I switched to blue, but I still might want to sell that yellow fish. That wouldn't be part of the edition because the colors are different, but you could still sell that. It might have the same title even, but it might be called a trial proof because the colors are different. So I'll give you a sheet. I'll try to, I didn't think to bring that today, but I'll bring you a sheet before the week's over that talks about the difference between a trial proof, which usually is just a change in the inking, the way the ink's applied or the color of the ink, versus a state proof. So let's say I printed this and I really didn't like the way the scales turned out, and I rework it somehow, like maybe I make them more delicate or something, and I print it again. If you change the screen, or if you change, like Stevens is doing this dry point print on plexiglass, if she decides she doesn't like the first draft and she does more work on the plate, then she's moved into a second state or a third state. So you'll use a fraction that says S over P for state proof, or some people will write it out, state 1, state 2. And so it's possible to have multiple editions of the same image, but at different states of the plate. So Rembrandt and Matisse, a lot of those artists, there might be 35 different states of some of those Picasso's bulls. There's a whole bunch that, so the artists, it's really helpful to collectors if you keep track of which state it is, as well as whether it's a trial proof. So again, trial proofs change in color, but not changing the actual stencil or the actual block. And then state proofs mean you're actually changing the matrix that you'll be printing off of. So, and sometimes you might, if the prints look so different, you might even title it differently if they're radically different when they come out. But when you do the fraction, you should try to find prints that really are identical. So you shouldn't have a yellow one and a blue one in the same edition. All right, so when I sign this, so, the title and then the fraction. So in this case, I really only have 2 that look exactly alike. I wouldn't count the newsprint one because that's on a paper that has quite a bit of acid in it. It won't last the way the better printmaking paper will, so I'm just going to treat that as a practice print. And then you sign your name. It's nice if you can sign legibly. Sometimes I've had, sometimes I've seen a print, but I'm really interested in finding out more about the artist, but because the signature is so scribbly, I can't begin to make out who the name is, and if there's not a label on the back to tell me who did that work, it's like that artist just doesn't exist, really. So you want to, even if your natural signature is very sloppy, try to print your name neatly or sign it neat enough that someone can make out the spelling. And then typically you also put the date. So I usually do Roman numerals just because sometimes, I feel like there's some discrimination against older prints sometimes. So if the print's 4 or 5 years old, sometimes, I don't know, I just, if they want to find out the date, they can figure it out in Roman numerals. So, and then that's pretty much it. So cyan pencil straight across the bottom. And then if I were to cut a window mat for this, I would include the information in pencil inside the window mat that you cut and then frame it. So. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this out. If you want to go ahead and